Good morning, and thanks very much for coming along to this session on the sound, on producing the sound of Bohemian Rhapsody. And we're delighted to have two of the members from the Oscar-winning team behind the film's audio. We've got the brilliant Nina Hartstone, who worked as a sound editor. Yes.
Thank you.
Nina is obviously, apart from her work on Bohemian Rhapsody, has worked on a number of huge films in recent years. She's worked on Gravity, Beauty and the Beast, Everest, and has clearly done some amazing work on the recent Oscar-winning Bohemian Rhapsody. And on her left, we have Justin Shirley-Smith, who was co-producer and engineer with Queen, and also had a very important part to play in bringing the film to life through its sound. So before we discuss the film, it'd be great if you could each just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your background and how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. Well, I started in the industry in 1992, back when all sound post was done on film, really. And I got myself a job in the cutting rooms, basically making tea and learning about the process of sound post production. And then within a couple of years, digital audio workstations started coming in, various different ones at the time. So I would get testers of them, and I'd learn how they worked, so that I could be a better assistant, and ended up sort of riding that wave of the digital media coming in, and assisting bigger and bigger crews in sound post production. Just worked my way up through that, really.
How about yourself, Justin?
I started in a studio owned by Queen, which was Mountain Studios in Switzerland, in 1984, just as a tea boy, basically, because that's what they wanted. They didn't want anyone coming in who thought they knew everything. And that was a commercial studio, so there were lots of other artists coming through during the 80s and early 90s. And later on, during that period, Queen were coming in more as Freddie got ill, and liked that town more because it was a bit more quiet and private for him. And then Brian asked me to come back and run his studio here. So I've been working on all Queen-related stuff and Brian May-related stuff since then.
Okay. So how did you both get involved with Bohemian Rhapsody? When did that all begin? And how did you both come to work on the project?
Well, obviously, Justin, you were involved before me, with it being a film about Queen. You were one of the first ports of call.
Yeah, I mean, I first started talking to John Warhurst, he's the supervising music editor, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, sound and music.
Sound and music editor for the movie, on one of the early scripts in 2014, I think. And there was a script with, all the songs listed, live songs and studio songs. And he wanted to know what we had in the archives that we could use. Did we have the multi-track recordings of all these things? And then I think there was quite a few. Well, there's at least two different lead actors that changed, and directors got changed, and then it got back on track in 2017. And obviously, I oversee the whole Queen audio-visual archive, so that's why I was involved.
And how disruptive was it at that point when there was that changeover with the director and the casting? Did that impact on your role in any way?
Well, I think in 2014 we made a start and we delivered some things that we had. We had basically all the multi-tracks apart from a few songs of the studio stuff, and then a certain amount of live stuff. And we already sort of isolated all the things we needed then, and we'd already started delivering things, but then it was basically they just knocked it on the head and production stopped. So it's a question of, that was the interruption. It was just we just stopped work, tools down, and then John called me and said we're up and running again, and so that was it.
And how did you first become involved, Nina?
I got involved. John first called me at the beginning of last year, 2018, whilst the shoot was still underway, and started explaining to me that it would be a fairly complex job, because I'd be, apart from doing dialogues and ADR and crowd, which I normally do, I'd also be taking on the vocals, and how we basically had we were using Freddie's vocal wherever we could. We had Rami obviously speaking and acting, and then for a couple of small areas we had a Freddie Mercury voice-alike, Mark Martell, who did some of the stuff that we didn't have any original material for. So basically we had a lead character that had 3 voices. So John wanted someone who could, you know, make that work really. So we had a lot of discussions about that in the early stages, and then I started full time on the film in April.
Okay, that sounds like it must have been quite challenging working with three vocals for the one character.
Yeah.
How did you go about making that work?
Well, I mean, it was all the acting, spoken words are obviously all Rami. That's all Rami's performance. And for all the concert footage and anything that we had Freddie for, we always wanted to use Freddie, of course, singing. It was just making sure that it was Freddie's vocal was very, very tightly fitted to Rami's mouth, and we also Rami was always singing on set. So we always had all his breaths and lip smacks and all the little bits and pieces that actually helped tie the performance into someone's mouth. And then we also recorded him at Abbey Road and at Goldcrest as well, getting more and more kind of breaths and all the sort of things that you need that just to help almost glue Freddie's performance into Rami's mouth. So just into weaving little bits and pieces. Fiddly, but it was great when it felt like it was really working.
And was there much collaboration between the two of you on that side of things? Obviously, having worked very closely with the band themselves, did you find yourself trying to get in there and make sure it was as believable and seamless as possible? Or was that something that was kind of left to one side?
That happened later, really, because we didn't really meet until the final mix down, did we?
Yeah.
But before the shooting started, they had to get all the music in place, all running exactly the right speed. And get the right versions of things, because we had multi-track and then also pre-mix stems for things which we already had from existing sessions. And then John said, well, can you make pre-mix stems for the things we don't have already? So we were mixing all that stuff. This is me and my colleagues Josh McRae and Chris Fredrickson, I should say. And that all had to be ready, I think, February 2017,
Right.
because John wanted to do was have the voice double Mark Martell sing exactly what Freddie had done on every track. That's every studio track and every live track that we selected, so that on set the director could switch and say, well, actually let's do it with this one, or that one's not working, so and that all has to be prepared first. So it's quite a lot of work before the shooting even started.
And how did you go about selecting? There was obviously a lot of archive sound. There were moments in the film from early shows and studio outtakes and bits and pieces like that.
Yeah.
Presumably that would have taken quite a lot of sifting through archives of, as I say, recordings, demos, live shows, etc. What was that process like?
Well, certain things like Live Aid itself and Rio, I think, were preset, and we had those recordings, luckily. Live Aid happened to be recorded by chance, which is, it's amazing that we had that on multi-track. Otherwise, the whole thing, it would have been a very different movie, I think. But then there's certain things like that it would say, I don't know, the last part of Bohemian Rhapsody from Edinburgh in 1970-something. But we didn't have anything from that, so we'd have to then look back and find. We didn't think that any of the official versions of Bohemian Rhapsody were the ultimate one, so we actually dug a bit deeper for that, and we found this amazing recording from 1977, Earl's Court, actually. I thought was astounding, and that's my favourite bit in the movie, I think.
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of other things where I think Fat Bottom Girls came from Paris. We found that as well. That's never been released before. So there's a few gems for fans there as well.
Yeah. So Nina, I wanted to talk a little bit about your kind of day-to-day role with mixing, syncing the picture with the sound.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering if you could just talk us a little bit through your workflow, the setup that you use, what if there was such a thing as a standard day on the project,
Standard,
and what that would look like?
Yeah, I mean there weren't too many standard days on this project, to be honest. But yeah, in terms of workflow, obviously I worked with Jens Peterson, my dialogue editor, and Louise Burton, our assistant, and then we had Amy Felton on as well. We had our team, and we basically, the first port of call always is to conform all the audio from the Avid. Because it's music, and because our editor, our amazing editor John Ottman, actually is very musical, he did quite a lot of speeding within the Avid, so things, to help the pace and to make sort of footsteps land in time with the music and those kind of things. So that was one of the first challenges, was to make sure that as we were conforming all the media, and getting all the individual mics that were recorded on set that John Casale had recorded, making sure that we then had a speed that matched the picture from the Avid that we received. So that was a sort of quite a long-winded process, making sure that we got that exactly right and everything was in absolute sync. And then it's basically weeding through the tracks, picking the mics that we want to use, and just sort of bouncing stuff back and forth. Obviously doing the queuing ADR, I went and shot all the ADR while Jens was going through and working through the original material and going through outtakes to see what we had to shoot and what we didn't have to shoot. And just going through that process. We had a few temp mixes as well that always kind of, you're trying to work towards the final film, but the cut's always changing, and you have a temp mix, and then you have to sort of stop doing your very detailed work and do a bit of a broader overview, and make a pass through it all, and then come back again. So it's that, recording the ADR, going through. Crowd was one of the very big kind of numbers on this film, so we really did want to make sure that we got the crowds really good, because they needed to. It's not something you can pull from a library, people singing along to Queen songs, apart from the stuff obviously that these guys have supplied, but most of the singing stuff obviously has the music on it already. It's like, it was good for the cheers and the shouts and the bits in between. That all needed re-recording, and a lot of that there was some big scenes on set where there had 600 extras in Live Aid, for example, and John Warhurst on set did a kind of, he emulated Freddie's call and response, his kind of AO, and basically played line by line the songs so that the audience could sing it back, and went through that a few times so we could build up the sound of lots of people singing along to Queen. And then we went down, and then I shot at Shepperton, multi-mic'd the exterior, and got in about 40 crowd people, and got them to, and banks of 8 basically, because we could get 8 headphones outside, so got them singing along and jumping up and down on a very, very hot day in July.
Okay. Did the workflow differ hugely from any other projects you'd worked on? Was there anything that was either unfamiliar or was a bit of a first for you in working on this project?
I think the main difference, I think, is with the vocals, really, because obviously with our vocals we have the sort of 3 elements of the picture, the music, and the vocal that needs fitting to the images that we have. So it was we worked closely, myself and John Warhurst and John Ottman, the picture editor, we all worked closely together, so I would fit the vocal to Rami's mouth, and then we'd go, okay, is it musical anymore, because we can't move the music track. And they're like, okay, well maybe we can slip the picture by a frame or 2. Let's try that and see if that puts that shot in sync. So there was a lot of kind of going around, the 3 of us with experimenting, just trying to find the best sweet spot for every single shot to get it as sync as possible, but also musical, and have the picture exactly where it needed to be.
How closely did you collaborate with Rami Malek on the scenes, particularly the big Live Aid?
Yeah, I mean, we got him to, in terms of Live Aid and stuff, we got him to do a lot of the breathing and sort of singing into things. Most of my work with Rami was really the spoken stuff more. However, we did get him to do a lot of breathing. I just got him to give me libraries and libraries of breaths, as if he's, getting him to sing into a line and ending on a line, and doing a lip smack on a line, like licking his lip, all those little bits that you actually see him doing on stage, so that I knew I had something for every little moment.
Okay. You said previously that you didn't really collaborate together too much until the latter stages of the film. Can you tell us a little bit about what that collaboration was like, how you worked together? Yeah.
Well, yes, we were just. I came in with my team, Chris and Josh, just for the final mix downs, and we had a room down the hall where we were simultaneously finishing off the soundtrack album, which is basically the stereo result of the stems that we provided. And then we were just, every time a reel was being mixed, and we were going in there and talking to Paul, the mixer, and every time a song or a reel was mixed, we would all sit there and listen and then give our notes. And that's kind of the collaboration we had, because we were all having our say.
We're all having our say, not fighting over the music machine, but we're all, because the one Pro Tools that was playing out the vocal and the music, everyone had different sort of parts on it, didn't they? So
yes, of course, yeah. So there's quite a lot of people involved, and John Ottman and Dennis, the co-producer, was heavily involved at that stage all the way through.
Yeah.
And how involved at this point with the band as well? I mean, presumably
they were there as well.
Yeah.
Whenever they could, they were in Vegas for some of it because they were performing there, weren't they?
But we sent them. They listened to everything.
Exactly.
Because we were sending them mix downs and stuff so that they could hear how everything was, how it had ended up in the mix. And obviously then they came back and reviewed everything as well, signed off on everything, didn't they?
Yeah, they signed off on everything, and as I say, all the stuff we did before, they signed off on all that, and were heavily involved in the selections too of the live material, and of course Brian and Roger recorded new material like the 20th Century Fox theme fanfare, I don't know what it's called, theme tune, which we recorded, with Brian's multi-track guitars and Roger's percussion. And then they did new recordings for Doing All Right as well, which is that came out very well, I think. And that was like a patchwork of some original things from I don't know the year 1970 or 71 when they recorded that, with new stuff that Tim Staffel, the original Smile singer, sang in Abbey Road.
Yeah.
And I think he played bass as well. That's right. So that was all kind of put together. A sort of shortened version in the movie, and then a longer version for the soundtrack. Okay. And Brian and Roger obviously were there for all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. I was also wondering what some of the kind of biggest technical challenges were that you faced on the film. It sounds like it's a fairly complex project. Was there anything that you encountered during the making of the film that you'd either not come across before, or that required some studio magic or trickery to get around?
I mean, it's sort of stuff I've touched on really, but obviously the three voices into one was certainly something that needed careful editing and hunting around, and just it's those transitions from the spoken word into there are two different voices, Rami's voice and Freddie's voice, so those transitions needed careful work really to make them utterly believable, and also coming out of the singing, when he's getting really into it, and the sort of breaths that come out at the end of the singing, a couple of those moments on the piano in Rockville Farm, those were probably the challenges. Also recreating Live Aid obviously was one of the big ones, trying to make sure that for every moment, wherever the camera is within the whole stadium, you feel like you're in the right spot. It sounds like it would sound from that moment. We did get to World Eyes the concert tracks at the O2 when Queen were in concert. Then we got a bit of time.
Queen and Adam Lambert were playing at the O2 Arena 2 nights, I think.
Like in July, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, forgotten which year. But,
last year.
we were that was going to be filmed anyway, so we'd already filled the whole auditorium with as many mics as we could, and that was Will Shapland, who's the engineer, the recording specialist. So he set that up for us already, and then Paul Massey had suggested that John Warhurst hire a venue, put a big PA in it, and play all the music through, and then record it. So we thought, well, we can do that in that setup. So because it was all set up for us basically, it was perfect.
Yeah, it was perfect.
And the only thing we had to do is we had to change all of our stems so that they didn't have any delays and reverbs on them. Obviously, so we wanted to play it through dry. So we reprinted all the stems and played it through in that PA with an empty arena, so there's no audience, it's just the ambience. And that's what Paul wanted. He wanted that natural ambience to be able to play with and, you know, pan around the room.
That's great. So that, you know,
very well.
A couple of shots right at the back of Wembley Stadium that you see, and you just, it feels so real, doesn't it, from using that track, the stuff that they recorded in there. That was really good.
And that was, in fact, that was all of the live music, I think, in the movie was played back through that PA. And in fact, we had to run it twice because of the two singers. Because at that stage we didn't know, you know, they wanted to be able to change the singer at the last minute. And so we had to run the Mark Martel vocal through and the Freddie vocal through. Because obviously, you know, you'd have to change the ambience to go with the...
Yeah.
Of course. So how did it feel when you watched the final product back? You know, because those scenes, particularly the Live Aid scenes at the end, but also some of the kind of smaller gigs and stuff at the start, how it felt extremely immersive, I thought, and quite seamless. It must have been quite gratifying watching that back and seeing that it had panned out, you know, very nicely.
I thought it worked really well, and Paul is a genius, isn't he?
Yeah,
Paul Massey.
he is, yeah.
And he said from the beginning that his idea was to not make it too big at the beginning. So the first scenes where they're playing Doing All Right and Keep Yourself Alive in sort of club, small venues, wouldn't sound so big, and then it would gradually get bigger and bigger as he went through. So by the time you get to the stadium, it's massive, you know.
Yeah, it's great. It does. I mean, we certainly for Live Aid, we wanted to make it almost sort of hyper real. You can go on YouTube and watch Live Aid with its stereo mix, whatever, and you know, get the performance of Freddie and everything. But actually, we wanted people who are watching the movie to feel like they were attending that concert, to feel like they were down there and actually watching it going on, and almost feel like they could be flying around the stadium, just enjoying it from all these different perspectives. And it definitely builds through right all the way up to Champions, you know. And every time we watched that reel, it was exciting, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was really cool.
Yeah. And what were some of your highlights from working on the film? Obviously, there are those big moments like that are clear, you know, focal points within the film. But were there any other things that, maybe from more of a technical perspective, you were quite proud of, or that were quite tricky to navigate, that maybe would have gone amiss?
I can't say when Brian May first walked in the room then. Okay. From a technical perspective, I mean, to be honest, it's just, we did the rain scene was quite a tricky scene, to be honest with you. We did ADR all of that scene, but all the way through we were very anxious to try and keep as much of the original performance as possible, as you know we always are in the films. But so there was a lot of detailed work cutting in and out of original, using syllables of ADR to tidy things up, going through outtakes, those kinds of things, so that actually there are certain scenes that you might at first glance think, okay, well, you're never going to be able to use the original for this. But Paul Massey did a brilliant job. We worked through it in a very detailed way, using little bits of ADR to tidy up sentences, and ended up, you know, that scene actually, I think it worked on both levels in the end. We managed to keep all the emotion from the original day, but actually make it clear enough that you could always hear what was being said.
Well, highlights for me probably is that live heavy section of Bo Rap, and that comes in. For me, that's a real highlight. I love the sound of it, and it's a great performance. And then prior to that, you've got there's a bit where Freddie's playing the piano in the farmhouse by himself, and we've used vocals from the original master tape. But they're not the master vocals, they're the outtake vocals, so they're slightly different. So, you know, that gives a feeling of, that he's made it up then, you know, he sang it freshly then. And then after that, there's a scene with Brian playing the solo, and I think Freddie says, that's almost it, play it again. So obviously you can't use the master track, and there wasn't an outtake of it, so Brian played it again, but slightly worse, which is fun.
It's probably quite hard for him.
Technically, actually, that was difficult to get the same sound, because it's not just the sound on his guitar. It's the particular mic positions and stuff, because it has a slightly, when you start listening to it closely, it's got a slightly kind of almost a boxy sound, but in a good way. It's hard to describe. And I think we got it though. I think it's pretty spot on. And apart from that, We'll Rock You as well. That was a scene where it has to go from being a studio recording where Brian's telling them how to play it, how to start the track, and it's the embryo of the track, and then it ends up going through, sounding like the finished track, and then suddenly we're in Madison Square Garden, and it has to, and I think it cuts backwards and forwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So obviously the tempo had to be the same, so it's built on that had to be built on the studio recording really, but with live elements brought in from all kinds of different places.
Okay, excellent. I'm a little bit conscious of the time, and I know that we do have time for some questions from the audience, so presumably there'll be quite a few. There is someone with a microphone, I've been told, but I can't see them from here, so if you just wave your hand in the air if you've got a question, someone will come to you. I can see a couple over here.
Hi, you may have already said this, and apologies if I missed it, but if you had the original track of Freddie singing, why did you need the mimic?
We had every option. The thing is, when you're making a movie, you never know what people are going to want to use, and also if the picture edit isn't final, you're never sure what you're going to do. So it's just the way we work. It's belt and braces for everything that we do. We knew that there were certain elements where we didn't have Freddie. So once we've got, we knew we had to use some of the early stuff, when he's in with the family and he's singing Happy Birthday on the piano. Obviously that's not a pre-record that these guys had, so we knew we had to use Mark Martel for some of those elements. So once we've got him in, it just makes sense to cover everything, so you have it.
The way John described it to me, John Warhurst, was that sometimes if you've got if the drama or the action means that the guy is speaking and then suddenly sings, the bridging between the two has to be right and believable, and if you're sort of stuck with Freddie and just doing what he's done on the day, it might not work. So that's one of the reasons as well.
Can you possibly tell me that how many man-hours altogether put it to do the sound for this film?
How many people?
How many man-hours was that?
Yeah, how many? I just want to know how long it take you to do the sound for this one, entire team.
I mean, in post-production, I started on the film in April and we finished in October, week in, week out. I mean, we did long hours towards the end, didn't we?
Yeah.
We were doing sort of 7-day weeks and quite late.
It was solid for me for a month and a half at the end, and then 2 or 3 months at the beginning, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have time for any more? One more. Okay.
One more.
Yeah, a question for Nina. I came mainly from factual, but just interested to the less experienced person, the key tricks for directing, recording, ADR. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've got to rehearse, get things in time, but in terms of acoustic and other variations, what are the few rules of getting good ADR recorded?
In terms of good ADR, I would say, I mean, the thing with each actor and director, in fact, is they've all got a different process. So it depends, so some actors I work with like to do a play and repeat, so they like to hear their line and then repeat it afterwards. Others like to do it to camera, but one line at a time. Others like to do a flow of a whole scene and do it and then go and pick up extra bits and pieces. But I think a couple of the key things are allowing them to move. I mean, on less we did do some stuff on this film where I quite often bring a boom and boom them so they can pace around the ADR theatre and let them have a long chain on the thing. But when I worked on Everest, for example, everything was on the boom. We had weight vests and weights in there, so to make him feel like he was up on top of the mountain and stuff, he was going in press-up position, he'd be lying down, be booming on the floor. It's mainly about the breath and the movement and the pitch to try and get used to it. I mean, I think it's years of experience of hearing whether it's going to work or not. But if you don't have it there in the performance in the first place, it's never going to work. If it sounds static and it sounds interior and it doesn't sound good, then it's not going to work. You just need to you just need to keep going at it until you get something that feels believable.
Okay. One more.
May I?
One more.
Nina, well, actually, both of you. I'm just interested to know. So John Casale recorded it on set, and obviously, I'm interested in that because that's what I do.
Okay.
Would you? I don't know whether there was any guidance from either of you before he started the project, and whether you thought it would have been interesting or useful if there had been collaboration between you and production sound, for instance, because of the complicated versions of playback, the different mics you would be using, what you, Nina, wanted to use for the vocals and all that. Was there any collaboration, and do you think it would be a better thing if we did talk to you guys, or we were allowed to talk to you guys beforehand?
I think it's always a good idea, actually, to collaborate early on in the film for people who are going to be dealing with the sound post to people who are going to be recording it on set. Obviously, on this film, I didn't come onto it at that time, but John Wallhurst was there. So John Wallhurst and John Casale certainly spoke heavily and were on set together the whole time. I think John Casale did an absolutely excellent job with the recordings that he provided for us. So, absolutely happy with that. But I do think it's really useful. I always love it, actually, if I can liaise, even if it's after the fact, but if I can then bounce back and forth, because I want to find out what mics we use so that I can replicate those in ADR. So I always try and liaise with the sound mixer anyway. But I think if you can do that ahead of time, all the better.
John Wallhurst, I think, is the thread that runs through the whole thing from beginning to end, really. So, yeah, that's where all the liaison was done.
You had to be called John, otherwise you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but a huge thank you to Nina Hartstone and Justin Shirley-Smith. Thank you.